in, baby. Let's lock in. Sweden's deadly gang war, Death Patrol versus the Shottaz.
Warning, this video contains themes of violence, death, and gang activity. This video
Not
is
the
an
gang.
educational documentary. It does not intend to glorify, incite, or encourage illegal behavior. All of the information is taken from public sources and is shown on the basis of fair use. I've made every effort to ensure accuracy of the sources.
I'm
but
lying.
I'm not
We Sharp and
responsible
Ultra
for
out
any
here,
content
chat.
third parties have published. Every effort has
This
been made
nigga-
to censor
this
this video
nigga
in
Trap
accordance
Lord,
with
he be
YouTube's
making the
community
most
guidelines. If you want to see
entertaining-
an uncut version of this video,
He
you can
basically
do so
do
on
better work than the police out here.
patreon.com/TrapLordRoss.
This
But
boy
if you're not
is
interested in
insane.
that,
We gotta
just
lock
hit the
in.
subscribe button and prepare to hear one of the
450?
craziest stories
Lock in,
ever
chat.
told.
Lock in.
Sweden, the country that gave us ABBA and IKEA, is probably the last country
IKEA?
to think of when it comes to gangster rap. It's a country known for its stability and affordability, its safety, being rated #1 for quality of life. Sweden has ranked #1 on the Gender Equality Index. They provide universal healthcare and free education to the level that the United States can only dream of. It's a beautiful country with incredible nature and picturesque landscapes, but behind the surface lurks a dangerous underbelly. Because despite all of the positive things that Sweden has gotten right, it's a country with deep-seated problems. For example, the international media has sometimes paid attention to violence occurring in one particular spot of the country. The city of Malmö, in the southern tip of Sweden, which has
What even is that?
one particular spot of the country. The city
People live in this? That's cool as hell. What is that?
of Malmö, in the southern tip of Sweden, which has since the early 2010s made headlines for having an unusually high number of shootings. However, tensions have risen to new highs in the mid-2010s following the so-called European refugee crisis, during which the liberal and desirable state of Sweden received the most asylum applications per capita in Europe. Over time, news and other media, particularly right-leaning ones, have begun publishing alarming reports of so-called no-go zones where even the police couldn't go due to out-of-control gang activity.
Our next guest has just returned from a trip to Europe.
Too late.
He went over there because he wanted to see the migrant crisis firsthand for himself. He went to no-go zones in Sweden. I didn't think there were such places,
What is a
but there
no-go
are
zone?
no-go zones where the police do not go. While he was there, he was jumped by 5 thugs.
I went there, met with the police officers. They said, when we're pursuing a suspect.
Fucking idiot. Wait. I hope they don't think I'm supposed to feel bad for this fucking dumbass. Like, am I supposed to feel bad for this dummy? He went there basically like, oh, I just want to, this is the most dangerous area right now. The police won't even go here, but I'm gonna pull up and see what all the fuss is about. What?
And they crossed that threshold, and there's about 30 or 40 of them in Sweden. They will not pursue.
I've just returned from Sweden, where something happened that I never would have imagined in such a wonderful country. My crew and I were attacked. We had things thrown at us, we were punched and kicked, and my cameraman was run over. Unfortunately, Sweden has become a victim.
Oh, they was on smoke. They was on smoke out there. What? So wait, they did research. They found out that this was a no-go zone, and then they went there, and then they framed this as if it was supposed to be crazy. She making this sound insane. This is like American news, literally. This is it's Fox Business.
Its own humanity. For all its generosity, Sweden is now grappling with communities of disaffected migrants who can't find jobs.
That makes so much more sense, dude. That makes so much more sense.
Is now grappling with communities of disaffected migrants who can't find jobs and have few prospects.
That nigga really struggling. He down bad.
Can't find jobs and have few.
Bro, that is crazy.
Prospects. There are now 55 declared no-go zones in Sweden, where police have to escort ambulances to ensure their safety. Within minutes of us arriving, a group of young men make it clear we're not wanted and deliberately run down our cameraman.
Whoops! Hey.
Why did he say whoops? wait, no, that cannot be a real response. Did they edit that in after?
Deliberately run down our cameraman.
Whoops! All
right, Shottaz, see you later, gangy.
Go on.
And even they fear their presence will be provocative.
I think it's better if you go in without us, because I think it would be...
Very aggressive.
Yeah,
Okay,
young. So we will stay here, and if it is...
That's fine.
You watch us.
Thank you. Okay.
You watch
Soon,
us.
It seemed that this violence and
Why are
lawlessness
y'all
had spread to
going?
the entire country, as reports circulated of teenagers roaming the streets of
It doesn't even make sense, bro, because it looks so nice. Like, what's going on?
Sweden with rifles and shootouts had become commonplace. The right-wing politicians in Sweden and elsewhere were quick to take advantage of these news stories to push their hard-on immigration and crime policies. And even globally, right-wing politicians seek to capitalize on the issue, with Donald Trump himself even being particularly outspoken about the problems arising in Sweden.
You look at what's happening last night in Sweden. Sweden. Who would believe this? Sweden. They took in large numbers. They're having problems like they never thought possible. I love Sweden. Great country, great people. I love Sweden. But they understand I'm right. The people over there understand I'm right. Take a look at what's happening in Sweden.
To be fair, the more liberal and left-leaning media were equally quick to focus on dismantling these claims and suggesting that the problems had at least been greatly exaggerated, with senior figures in the Swedish
Niggas
police
are throwing
coming out to publicly
grenades.
announce
How
the
are we
existence of
exaggerating?
so-called no-go zones in the country.
To me, I've been
There's
working
grenades on the street.
The most vulnerable areas in Stockholm. I've been working there for 18 years. We don't have a no-go zone in Stockholm. In my opinion, we don't have a no-go zone in Sweden.
But this isn't a video about the migrant crisis. It's a video about gangsters. And not dissimilar to the migration in the United States that saw Italian Americans establishing the mafia there, in the years that followed the influx of people from all over the world, a new, modern gang culture would emerge in Sweden, arguably
The mafia got started in Sweden?
with a heavy influence from gangster rap and drill music coming out of Chicago and London. Because as the years went on, reports about increasing violence, and particularly increasing gang-related violence, would unfortunately
Did he say that? Am I wildin'? I swear he said that, right?
not go away, but become much more common in Sweden. From shooting high-caliber weapons into rivals' apartments, shootouts in the middle of the street, ghost riding luxury cars for cover, drive-bys out of BMWs with AK-47s, brazen assassinations in packed restaurants, to turf wars between rival gangs that go far beyond shootouts, with gangsters literally blowing up their ops buildings.
It happened in the residential area in Fullerö, north of the city of Uppsala. Investigators say the 25-year-old victim was a neighbour of the targeted premises and had no criminal links. Several other people were injured in 2 other blasts across the country, one in the south and one in a suburb of Stockholm.
I don't understand what's happening with
the attacks are said to be
this.
part of a long-running feud between 2 rival gangs.
YouTube must have blocked the video, so he had to do this.
Shootouts and bombings have become commonplace in part of the country, leaving the media, public, and politicians asking themselves what can be done to stop the out-of-control gangs from waging war there. Going into the election year of 2022, gang violence became a hot-button issue for voters in Sweden, and even the left-leaning political party in power at the time was admitting that something had gone deeply wrong in the country. But that seemed to be too little, too late for the Swedish public. And now it was the right-wing parties, particularly the far-right
that's why we
party
watch them,
Sweden
because some of the people
Democrats,
we
who would
listen
end up
to,
coming out as a big
supposedly
winner at
this
the
video is
elections
about them.
and becoming the second largest party in Sweden. This enabled them to finally have direct government influence for the first time in the party's history, despite not officially becoming a government party. Now, much of the new government's policy initiatives would center around tougher immigration policies and introducing harsher sentences for gang members, including those who were underage, with the leader of the far-right party even suggesting that kids as young as 13 should be able to get a life sentence there. But by this time, the problem was deeply entrenched in Swedish culture, and the gangs in Sweden had already formed, being made up of youths who had moved to Sweden years, even decades ago, and in many cases who had even been born in Sweden, representing the 2nd or 3rd generation of immigrants. And of course, as we all know, where there's gangsters struggling, it's only a matter of time before some of those gangsters become gangster rappers and begin using their music to tell the tale of their struggle in the streets. And in recent years, in connection to the rise of gang culture there, the new hot-button issue to emerge in Sweden is the popularity of gangster rap. As over these years of intense gang violence in the streets, emerging from those streets have been numerous gangster rappers, who have become mainstream names in the Swedish music scene, all off the back of their alleged ties to serious criminal gangs.
These are all the niggas that
Biggest star,
what the
rapper,
hell?
who had allegedly seemingly associated with several different gangs from the country, was first kidnapped by one of these gangs in 2020, and later shot to death in 2021 by unknown assailants in an execution-style attack that was also deemed gang-related. There has been much debate over what role do the rappers play in participating in and fueling the escalating gang culture in Sweden. And one of the more recent examples, in October 2023, Sweden was experiencing a particularly shocking wave of violence, apparently driven by one of the more prominent modern gangs, the Foxtrot network, which the police suspect to be one of the country's leading drug distributors for the moment. They would fall into an all-out war against their enemies for the control of the country's drug trade, as well as going through a bloody internal conflict that has seemingly split the gang into two sides. And following a string of deadly shootings and bombings where numerous people had been killed, including a 13-year-old kid.
This is why the niggas ain't getting caught right here. God damn, this nigga right here staring at some ass. He like, yo, I'm not gonna lie, bro. When they start letting the baddies become police officers, he like, God damn, God.
And the mother of a gang member. A rapper named 50, affiliated with the gang, would even go on Instagram Live together with one of the gang's alleged leaders, Benzema, who was allegedly hiding from the Swedish police in Iraq and had even rumored to have been dead, killed by hired assassins. However, this would turn out to be just a trick by Benzema to fool his ops, who he would taunt relentlessly in the video, while toting a gold-plated AK-47 and surrounded by similarly armed goons looking like a real-life character from GTA. Unfortunately for 50 and Benzema, their gangster lifestyle wouldn't last for long, because soon after, 50 and several other Foxtrot affiliates were arrested in Tunisia on gang-related charges. While for Benzema, the end would be even worse, because in January 2024, he would end up being assassinated in the middle of a busy street in Iraq, shot in his car just like he had faked his death only a few months earlier. With Swedish gangsters' connections to the criminal underworld being this blatant, it's no surprise then that much like in some other European countries such as the UK, there have even been demands to censor gangster rap artists in the Swedish media. Meanwhile, other gangster rappers have announced that they are ending their music careers, concerned about the
cause facts, like especially if niggas is talking about real straight crimes, like Jesus Christ, they gotta do something about that shit. Like niggas will shoot a nigga in the street and then make a music video right in the middle of their damn video. This is insane.
Influence they're having on the youth, and
you can activate videos from command prompt.
Participating in this
I don't even know what a command prompt is.
Become online. So today we're going to dig deep and look into the shocking untold story of the rise of gangs and learn once and for all exactly how gangster rap turned Sweden upside down.
1,000 miles from south to north, Sweden is rich in scenic variety. From the wide plains of the south.
Sweden's amazing. It's incredible. The people are beautiful. They've got no trash. Their fish even tastes like candy. Like, nothing bad ever happens there.
Riots broke out in the Stockholm suburb.
Just across a narrow waterway
Albanian hitman?
Of the modern city.
You look at what's happening last night in Sweden. Sweden. Who would believe this? Sweden. They took in large numbers. They're having problems like they never thought possible.
There's always a friendly policeman to direct visitors to the points of interest.
Sweden. And then a day later, I said, has anybody reported what's going on?
Vi har mycket skjutningar och vi har mycket mord. Jag återkommer till det.
And it turned out that they didn't, not too many of them. Take a look. Take a look at what happened in Sweden.
Nah, this boy made a movie. What is this?
30 or 40 no-go zones in Swedish towns and cities.
Correct.
30 to 40 of them.
That's right.
The country is experiencing some serious security issues.
This is one of the brightest features of Sweden's.
This is like a propaganda film right now.
Today, this old kingdom is a modern country. Yes, but in many ways it remains.
God damn, nigga, are you gonna get to this shit?
In the 80s, shortly.
Fuck.
The Swedish hip-hop scene emerged in the 80s, shortly after the birth of the genre in New York in the late 70s, and Swedish hip-hop followed in the b-boy mold of New York hip-hop's original origins. Firstly, focusing on the pre-rap elements of the genre,
there's
like breakdancing.
Nothing on that list is on
breakdance events in.
Nothing on that list is actually getting checked out. That was just from we were playing the game last night and people were DJing while we were playing games.
Stockholm, showing the world that Sweden could get down with just as much talent as the New York b-boys. But at the end of the 1980s, pioneering rappers like MC Tim had emerged from the country, making history by becoming the first rapper in Sweden to ever drop a 12-inch hip-hop record in the native language. The end result was fairly respectful towards the original hip-hop culture, yet undoubtedly somewhat cringe-inducing if you look back at it these days.
Varför har du en kedja runt halsen? Dels för att de vill ha det och dels för att det är som en symbol för hiphopen. Hur länge håller man på med det, tror du? Jag kommer hålla på tills jag slutar.
But the early rap scene in Sweden and other northern European countries was often defined by the native Caucasian Swedes trying to imitate the African American scene, generally in a respectful manner. Now, in the 1980s, there were already many different ethnic minorities in Sweden, as the country was one of the first in Europe to adopt multiculturalism as a mainstream political ideology. In the years leading up to the hip-hop boom, implementing one of the most generous immigration policies in the continent. First, it was mostly work-based immigration, but in the 70s and 80s, this transformed as the country began receiving many refugees from all over the world. And in decades since, Sweden has actually taken one of the largest numbers of refugees per capita in Europe and the rest of the so-called Western world. And as demographic shifted,
damn, niggas! Fuck! Did what did it say? What did it say? What did it say? It said we doing that shit right now, right this second? It said we doing that shit right now, right this second? Is that what it says? Is that what the title says? Damn, bro. Shut the fuck up. Just be here yapping.
Range of people from those minorities. Decades since, Sweden has actually taken one of the largest numbers of refugees per capita in Europe and the rest of the so-called Western world. And as demographics shifted, a diverse range of people from those minority groups would soon enter the budding Swedish rap scene and begin expressing themselves. It didn't take long for Swedes with multicultural backgrounds to begin representing the country musically all over the world, with Swedish artists such as Nina Cherry, who actually rapped in English, being one of the first to receive considerable popularity in the late 1980s, with songs that were surprisingly similar to the American pop rap scene. Perhaps in this case, with Cherry's diverse musical ability being the result of her stepfather being the established American jazz trumpeter Don Cherry and her biological father, Sierra Leonean actor and musician Amadou Jah. She would have early success with her first album, Roll Like Sushi, which actually peaked at number 3 on the UK albums chart. She would go on to win 2 Grammy Awards, an MTV Award, and a Grammy nomination. Of course, in the 90s, Swedish pop acts would gain popularity globally, and a wave of Europop groups emerging from Sweden would find huge success all over the world. People like Ace of Base and E-Type would represent Sweden's musical abilities globally. However, beyond the internationalized Swedish artists making music in English for the wider British and American audiences, in the midst of this pop music boom, there was one artist who would take Swedish rap all the way to the top of the Swedish charts.
MC10?
Markoolio was a rapper of Finnish background who migrated to Sweden as a child, with his stage name being inspired by the American rapper Coolio mixed with his real name,
so the Finland
Marko,
niggas really been
releasing
killing
a string
it.
of hit albums and songs in Swedish, which racked up many platinum plaques in the process. And while Markoolio represented one of the biggest mainstream successes when it came to Swedish rap to emerge in the 90s, his music was more polished, tongue-in-cheek, and aligned with pop music rather than the gritty, authentic, and marginalized voices that pioneered American rap music. Now, earlier in the 90s, homegrown Swedish rap emerged with a more localized style and a connection to their equivalent of the streets. For example, the Latin Kings were a rap group of Swedish and South American backgrounds who made the charts with their 1994 album, which translates roughly to Welcome to the Suburbs, which popularized the use of so-called suburban Swedish, a multi-ethnic youth language adopted by the working-class youth in the country. This dialect was born in the migrant-dominated suburbs in the outskirts of large cities like the capital Stockholm. The name of this dialect as suburban Swedish stems from the fact that unlike in the US, where poorer and marginalized communities are often located in the inner cities, while the suburbs are generally safe places for the middle classes, in some European countries like Sweden, this setting is often reversed. And in Sweden's case, the country had actually built an enormous amount of public housing projects in the outskirts suburbs as part of their so-called Million program in the 60s and 70s. This was literally a political mission to provide 1 million new public housing units, a highly ambitious task, which they actually succeeded in. I mean, that sounds like something the UK should do, to be honest. But anyway, it was in these suburbs that many of the new migrants eventually settled in Sweden, including most of the refugees who had fled there to safety, with many of these refugee communities often struggling with issues like unemployment and social exclusion. This would eventually create
because if they don't have no money and they need to work, that makes sense.
Would actually become the majorities. And it was in these communities where a new wave of authentic and real rappers began slowly emerging. Rappers whose backgrounds was much more reminiscent to the original oppressed communities who birthed the American American hip-hop scene in inner-city New York. One particular artist would actually end up playing a central role in truly popularizing Swedish rap music that was still faithful to the original American scene in style, while still being localized and authentic to the local Swedish culture. That rapper was called Petter. After dropping his debut album in 1998, he would go on to drop 2 albums that topped the charts in Sweden, as well as racking up a litany of platinum-certified top 10 hits in the decades that followed. He would play an integral role in making rap music truly mainstream in Sweden, kicking off a Swedish hip-hop boom at the end of the 90s and in the early noughties.
And to be that
despite
big
rap
and only be
becoming
at like
mainstream in Sweden throughout the
16K,
90s, also during
and
this
he's
decade,
known as like a
underground rap
pioneer.
circles
That's
began to
fucking
grow.
insane.
Subgenres such as so-called conscious rap would also gain popularity in the country. The rap group Loop Troop, or Loop Troop Rockers, made up of MC Promo and Supreme, as well as DJ-turned-producers MB and Cosmic. They would gain an audience in Sweden and abroad by rapping in English about graffiti culture, as well as police brutality, corruption, racism, and other socially critical topics with a Swedish lens. Since then, they've made a name for themselves in European underground circles for the last few decades. However, interestingly, as the decades went on and Sweden's demographics would slowly shift, partly due to the influx of migrants flocking to these suburban communities, rappers of a diverse range of backgrounds would ultimately emerge and increasingly reach the Swedish mainstream music culture. Artists such as Timbuktu, named after the city in Mali that his father hailed from, who would eventually drop a #1 album in 2007, which I'm not even going to try and pronounce. There's also the Nigerian-born Ayo and Adam Tensta, whose father was from Gambia, but adopting a rap name derived from the suburb of Tensta in the outskirts of Stockholm where he hails from. This was yet another suburb that has recently become known for its escalating gang wars. Into the 2000s, the Swedish rap landscape would begin to look more and more diverse,
long time,
with more breakout talent coming in the form of Eson and Phil and their crew High One, as well as people like Ken Ring and the rap group Labyrinth, whose rappers come from various backgrounds ranging from Chile, Palestine, and Serbia. The diversity...
Hi, Goran. How's it going, gang? We're watching a YouTube video from Trap Lord Ross. This video has been recommended probably underneath the last 15 to 20 of my YouTube videos and every day in the chat for the last 2 days, 3 days or so. It's called Sweden's Deadly Gang War, Death Patrol versus Shottaz. And yeah, we're pretty much just learning about what's going on in Sweden. Everything good? You doing good today, man? Nothing? You're good? All right. Enjoy yourself, man.
In Swedish rap would extend beyond simply the heritage of the rappers themselves, as these rappers would commonly speak in their music about their hard upbringings in the million-programmed suburbs, as well as criticizing the racism and exclusion of Swedish society that had apparently been directed towards minorities from these neighborhoods. But although gangs had certainly already begun to form in many of these areas, the music rarely, if ever, actually depicted the gang lifestyle. However, in the final year of the 2000s, one rap group emerged that changed this completely. That group was called Kartellen, translating to the cartel. This group would become famous for their provocative depictions of crime and social problems in the suburbs they grew up in. The story of Kartellen is a somewhat unusual one, but to make a long story short, the group was started by 2 lifelong Swedish criminals who were serving long sentences in Finnish prison for allegedly taking part in a murder plot. The group was made up of Leo Kinnuson, which means Chinese, Carmona, of Swedish and Chilean background, and Jan Babyface Reninen of Finnish and Swedish background. While in prison, Carmona decided to start a rap group in Sweden that would tell the stories of him and Reninen, the kind of stories about Sweden's criminal underworld that the country had never heard before in music. These were the true stories from their past lives of crime, including one of the largest robberies in Sweden's history, in which Carmona was allegedly one of the 3 perpetrators in 2002, as well as the murder of one of Sweden's biggest mob bosses of the 90s, Joenojoseph, whom Reninen had apparently executed in cold blood during a horse racing event in 1998 whilst working as a hitman. This was an assassination which kick-started a violent Serbian gang war within Sweden. Reninen received...
It's so crazy, bro. I think that somebody's got to come out. Somebody's got to come out from like deep in the hip-hop trenches and just explain to niggas that they be capping their asses off. They be capping, because holy shit, these niggas telling real stories? Oh my god. Oh my god. We gotta switch to fucking country or something, dude. Jesus Christ, man.
an 8-year sentence for the murder, which he only ended up serving a little over 5 years of. An incredibly low sentence that many thought was actually the result of his innocent looks, earning him the nickname Babyface. For the rap group Kartellen, Carmona recruited 2 rappers from their old stomping grounds in the suburbs of Stockholm, Seb Stax and Kaka, both of whom had lengthy criminal pasts. Now, this group was a winning
Nah, that's fucking insane. I just want to know who was out there in the streets like, yo, that nigga Kaka go crazy. Like, what? This nigga named himself some shit? He named himself shit. And niggas was like, yeah, he really be rapping though. Like, what the fuck?
Combination. And Kartellen would go.
Kaka, you talking about Lil Kaka? Lil Kaka? Stop this shit. Stop this shit, bro. I pay attention to people that matter, dog. I pay attention to niggas that matter. We're not talking about useless ass soccer players that had 2 good seasons and all of a sudden now they're great. I don't care. I don't care.
Go on to become extremely popular in the Swedish media and charts in the following years. However, at the time, they were clear exceptions in the Swedish rap scene, where many also thought that gangster rap just didn't fit in with Sweden's open and tolerant culture. This is actually reflected in a popular music video by The Carousel, a parody of The Cartel that came out in 2012, which makes fun of Swedish gangster rap in this context. This skit would actually mock Swedish gangsters for wearing sunglasses in the winter and making light of their dental hygiene, a music video which even featured a cameo from the real Cartel, who pull up on them at the end of the video.
Stäng av musiken! Musiken, det skojar ni med oss. Vad är ditt problem? Vad fan är ditt problem? Driver du? Hej! Driver du? Det är vi som är Kartellen. Mannen, har du härmat vår lock? Hej, vad fuck? Vad är det här då, mannen? Vadå, du har fet lina?
Now, at the beginning of the 2010s, true gangster rap in Sweden was still extremely niche. However, that would...
It just said, we are the cartel. If that's how they be pulling up, bro, I understand why people be dying, because I would have been weak. I'm like, what is going on, brother?
Rapidly changed after the drill music movement began spreading from Chicago to the rest of the world all around these times, with Chicago rappers' ultra-real and violent interpretation of gangster rap rapidly influencing the Swedish rap scene, as various artists would emerge trying their best to bring that Chirac energy to Sweden, and showing the world just how real tourist areas like Stockholm could actually be beneath the surface.
That was such a crazy time, bro.
By 2018,
that whole
with the
Chirac
rise
shit was
in Swedish
insane.
gangster rap imitating Chicago drill, an unexpected face would enter the Swedish rap scene. The rapper Einar, a wholesome-looking 15-year-old teenager whose mother is actually an accomplished Swedish actress named Lena Nilsson. Although Einar didn't grow up in the public housing projects like most other Swedish gangster rappers, he did grow up in the Stockholm suburb of Enskededalen, where idyllic wooden houses in the south, like ones often seen in travel shows about Sweden, would meet working-class apartment buildings in the north. And these kind of hoods are actually where Einar can be seen hanging out with his friends in early music videos, particularly Enskededalen, or simply Dalen, a small district in Stockholm, which is also where one of Stockholm's most infamous gangs, the Dalen Network, allegedly takes its name from. Despite his mother's success, Einar's childhood was reportedly somewhat troubled, as he claims in his song Youngster with Extra Energy that he and his friends were up to no good from a young age, stealing scooters and selling drugs in school. Eventually, Einar would meet a man called Patty. Now, that's his name, don't cancel me for that. But he would allegedly be a former leader of the Dalen Network gang who would actually end up becoming Einar's manager, together with another alleged member of the network called Chapo. This street management duo would unfortunately meet a tragic end, when in 2018, Packy would be killed with allegations that Chapo was even responsible, with all of this ultimately leading to a trial where Chapo would beat the charges. With all of this going on, it's no wonder then that Einar himself was going through some difficult times. Einar's problem behavior would eventually cause the social services to take him away from his family for 6 months, but this would do little to change his behavior, and eventually he began carrying a gun and following in the path of gangsters that he had surrounded himself with. However, Einar had also been incredibly passionate about rap music since a very young age, and during these turbulent years of his life, clips would circulate online depicting the baby-faced teenager rapping in the studio and outside in the Swedish streets, with Einar putting the pain from his turbulent upbringing into his lyrics, suggesting that rap had always been his salvation in between spells as a drug dealer, with Einar ultimately inferring that rap music actually made him a millionaire. His career would absolutely explode in early 2019 after he dropped his gangster love song Katten, or Trakten, which translates to cat, in this song meaning a girl from the hood. And he would also drop a music video for the track which was unmistakably gangster despite its romantic undertones. Although there were already some gangster rappers who were already getting popular before Einar, since his success, gangster rap in Sweden has truly become the sound of the mainstream, including rappers with real connections to some of the most violent gangs in the country. And as time has gone on, in the continued acceptance of drill music and culture in the mainstream, Swedish gangster rap has gotten far more violent, with firearms in music videos becoming commonplace, and the gangbanging culture of the suburbs becoming a popular theme of the music there. Unfortunately, Einar's proximity to the streets would ultimately prove fatal. But in order to understand the deep connections between the music and the streets of Sweden, we've got to take a closer look at the hidden criminal underworld and learn about the real and dangerous gangs.
Damn, so it's really just like America out there for real. Because it's a lot of like, a lot of the rappers and shit out here, they get fronted by a lot of like dope boys and stuff like that, you know what I'm saying? And then a lot of times, like especially in like the early 2000s, like when a lot of people would want to go perform or want to do anything, a lot of the promoters and stuff like that were the big drug dealers in the neighborhoods. Because if you wanted to come there or you wanted to perform in that area, you would have to pay them off in order to be able to perform. You know what I'm saying? So it's like they would be the ones fronting all the money for their music videos. They find a person in the area, you know what I'm saying, blase, and they the ones throwing up all the bread. And now and then shit, and really nowadays, all the goddamn dope boys is just turning into rappers. Crazy world, man. Really is.
To be one of the safest countries on earth.
Yeah, bro, that was like kind of like in the early sense of like checking in and shit. And now checking in really is just, hey, let niggas know that you moving around so we don't rob the wrong car one day. Or, hey, ain't no guns allowed in this area, just so you know, come check in and we'll make sure you got one in the trunk. You know what I'm saying? Type shit.
The wave of gangster rap in Sweden makes it seem like the gang problem has arrived in the country pretty much out of nowhere during the 2010s. And while to a certain extent you could argue that that's the case, the roots of the gang problems in Sweden go arguably much further into the past. Some concerns towards the social problems brewing in the Swedish suburbs have been discussed even internationally as far back as the 90s. For example, there's a 1998 article in the New York Times highlighting the ghettoization of a Stockholm suburb called Rinkeby, a place where the brutal gang war that we later discuss in this video actually begun. This was an article which ended.
It's like nobody understands that like row houses and putting big blocked up places like that where everybody in the area is poor just never works. It never works. And then you got Trapboy Ross like, yeah, I wish they would do something like this in fucking the UK. The UK would be in shambles, dude. The UK would be in shambles. You wanna know what the fucking world needs to do? We need to fix all of our own goddamn countries, and everybody needs to stand on business where the fuck they live. Stop taking in fucking other people from other goddamn countries and stand on business where you fuck you at. Like, I'm still trying to figure out, like, niggas is talking about goddamn immigrants is coming into America getting like $5,000 fucking debit cards and shit, monthly stipends. I'm like, nigga, I'm over here dying, dog. I'm working fucking 3 jobs at one point in my goddamn life. The niggas is out here starving, and we taking other people in. Like, what is going on? The world is dying, and we got to figure it out, bro. We got to figure it out. This is insane.
With a bizarre romanticization of the hood, where a child would actually explain that the children all had stories about how their parents wouldn't let them party in Rinkeby and just how interesting they feel life is in these areas. Interestingly, some years later in 2005, as France was dealing with large
Why would you want to go out there and party, gang? Stay in your area.
French newspapers were presenting Rinkeby as a model example for countries like France to follow. However, perhaps nobody could have predicted just how much things would later escalate, particularly during the 2010s.
I saw a video on Twitter like 2 days ago, gang, and they was getting chefed up in a chicken shop. I saw a shorty get knifed up on the goddamn subway. What the fuck is going on in the UK? Niggas is saying it's safer. I would take a grenade any day before a nigga came up to me and stabbed me in my chest while I was trying to order a 3-piece. All I wanted was a 3-piece and some fries, and a nigga came and shanked me in my back because he broke. That is insane. Insane, bro.
The Swedish case in 2019 would estimate that there were around 30,000 gang members and affiliates in the country. Now, for context, in the UK, the country which is most often discussed when talking about a gang problem in Europe, there were approximately 33,500 so-called professional gang members in 2018. Now, this was considered to be a pretty large number, and according to The Guardian, this meant that there were more gangsters in Britain than in all 3 big Italian-American mafia families. But if you take a step back, and account for the fact that the UK's population is about 6 times the size of Sweden's, the numbers there become much more alarming. Statistics show that lethal violence in Sweden has also been steadily increasing since the early 2010s. But the somewhat moderate increase shown in this statistic tells only part of the problem. What makes the situation more alarming is that while other types of homicides have actually decreased, which has been a common progression in Europe, gun homicides in particular have grown so much that the overall trend of violence in Sweden has been increasing, with gun-related deaths actually tripling between 2012 and 2020.
They definitely doing the same thing they was doing over here in America. Somebody, one of them goddamn governors or politicians is sending straps to the hood, okay? One of them somebody in the government is giving them niggas guns, because you are not telling me that there are that many hidden fucking Russian stash houses out there that niggas are robbing and getting straps from. Where are all these guns coming from, gang? Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we lying to ourselves for? Something's going on. Somebody's pushing some type of agenda.
Taking Sweden from the very bottom of Europe's gun violence ranking.
They got like brand new Glockies in them bitches. These are not Soviet weapons, gang. These niggas got brand new AKs. Brand new AK. The niggas are not even fighting in the war with brand new weapons. And they got these niggas in music videos with 9 AKs. And then the frontline soldiers, they going in there with goddamn Tonka trucks and shit.
To the very top. And now, only Albania, a country with decades-long issues with guns and deadly feuds that put the country ahead of even America in per capita gun deaths, leaving Albania as the only European country more deadly for gun crime than Sweden. But Albanian gangs, that's a whole other video.
Niggas talking about us, they be running it. See, that's what I'm saying. I got in the Call of Duty lobby today, and they told me I needed to go shoot up a school, and they need to be worried about what's going on in their country. This is crazy.
Again, to put Sweden's staggering number of guns in context, the Swedish police estimate that there are 3,000 illegal firearms in the country's capital of Stockholm alone, which is around 3 times the number of guns thought to be in London, which is a city around 10 times the population of Stockholm. And the per capita gun murder rate of the Swedish capital is about 30 times that of London. The great majority of the shootings in Sweden are connected to organised crime, with the new street gangs being largely to blame for this alarming increase. Particularly, statistics show how the rise in gun crime correlates with an increase in drug-related crime that most—
You thinking the first nigga that pulled up, he was like, wait, we not using machetes no more? And niggas just mowed them, they whole crew down with AKs. They was like, wait a second, what happened? When did we pack a punch? Like, it's insane.
Participated. Moreover, the use of explosives by these gangs has also increased significantly, which has further resulted in numerous deaths and horrific news stories that make Sweden seem like it's in a state of civil war.
I woke up at 4:40 from a proper blast, and it was one of those, you know, rattling blasts, like...
In Sweden, a woman has died after what police believe may be the latest in a series of explosions linked to a gang war. Investigators say the 25-year-old victim was a neighbour of the targeted premises and had no criminal links.
Police think a grenade attack in Sweden, which killed an 8-year-old boy, could be linked to a gang-related conflict. Yusuf Wasami from Birmingham in the UK died when a hand grenade was thrown through the window of an apartment in Gothenburg.
Police in Sweden say a man has died after picking up a suspected hand grenade in Stockholm.
This shit don't even be making sense, bro. It don't even making sense. Y'all see they got El Chapo's boss yesterday? That don't even make sense. You telling me how? In the world that we live in today, you telling me that there are ways that a nigga can get on a plane and fly to another state and land in that motherfucking goddamn country, and niggas can't, they don't know who on the plane? Like, what are we talking about? What are we talking about, bro? This shit, They be letting this shit happen,
the
bro. They be letting it
that
happen.
we'll be discussing in this video being the Death Patrol, a gang that hails from the suburb of Rinkeby in northwest Sweden, a name which was first given to the gang by the media, as seen in shocking reporting on the group being suspected of committing as many as 10 murders. The original members of the Death Patrol apparently called themselves 3MST, with the name being derived from the names of their most prominent members. 3 being 3M, referring to 3 founding members whose names begin with the name 3MST actually stands for the Three Musketeers, but later the abbreviation DP for Death Patrol would become a common name used to refer to the gang in internal Sweden. The Death Patrol formed in 2015,
double penetration is crazy,
by a new generation who have
I
been
know
given the new name.
I know they got in mad fights when they first changed that name because niggas was definitely coming at them for that. That's crazy. That's why they had to off so many people. That was why niggas was like, what? DP? Like, we not taking that serious.
Ulster children, referring to another suburb near Rinkeby. This new generation of the gang has also been referred to as the Death Patrol 2.0 or YDP. Lamauri is a strong leader who had organized the gang like a mafia with a strict vertical leadership structure. Besides Haval, the gang has been associated with the popular rapper Sikan, who often hangs out in Vorby Gård in his music videos. This gang has had over a decade-long conflict with another gang from the same area called the May Network. This conflict stems from the early 2010s when there was another gang in the area called VYG, or Vorby Young Gangsters. Although it's not clear if this was an actual criminal organization or just a fragmented group of out-of-control youngsters, what is known is that one of their members, named Mikhail Yokana, was indeed serious about making a name for himself in the criminal underworld. In 2011, Yokana was shot in Vorby, but would fortunately survive, and it was rumored that Lamauri's group was behind the shooting, which may have had something to do with territorial disputes regarding drug dealing. According to the local police, from this point forward, the Vorby network, led by Lamauri, and the May network, founded by Jokana, were in serious conflict, which would only escalate as time went on. After Jokana had been targeted in several assassination attempts, one of them injuring his wife and killing his friend, he would go on a retaliation mission that would become one of the biggest news stories in Sweden at the time. On the 2nd of August 2020, Jokana and his 2 accomplices would drive to a gas station with the aim of shooting members of the Vorby network, but instead, they would end up killing an innocent 12-year-old girl who was just out walking her dog. This tragic event caused a public uproar, and eventually the men were found and arrested. And
literally every time, it's just innocent people.
The murder weapon, an AK-47, had actually been used in a music video by an affiliated rapper called Tenan, who himself had ties to the May network. The music video, which was for a song called Blue Cheese, has since been removed from the internet, and Tenan would end up receiving a 4-year sentence for the illegal weapon. Initially, it appeared that the Vorby network would largely escape the situation scot-free, but soon it turned out that they were in fact suspects in another case that would end up making even more
Don't they have like the best camera systems out there?
Story.
What's going on?
The gangs discussed here have been part of some of the most brazen gang wars that have devastated Sweden's streets in the past few years, as well as blurring the lines between music and real-life organized crime in a way that has rarely been seen in Europe before. So now you know the key players and organizations that run the streets of Sweden, it's time to begin our deep dive into the violent streets of Sweden and the music that represents them. Going back almost 10 years to the Stockholm suburb of Rinkeby, where one dispute between childhood friends would ultimately lead to years of bloodshed that would eventually spread from the small suburb in the outskirts of Stockholm all the way beyond Sweden's borders, and in the process, launching the career of one of Sweden's most popular rappers.
What? Oh, so pretty much the gangs just were like, hold on, man, we can get some of this rap money.
This land used to be a military training ground until it was turned into residential areas
they started sending shots at everybody
in the late 60s and early 70s. But originally targeting the growing working and middle classes in big cities like Stockholm, where housing shortages were a serious issue, over time, the middle classes would move out of the...
I want to know, somebody's got to do a documentary on when gangs switched out from like community-based protection services to then all of a sudden becoming like, yeah, we just care about ourselves. Like, we just gonna wreak havoc in our own area. We gonna make everything in our own area just the shittiest it could be. And then we gonna die and it's just gonna go back to whatever it was. Like, I don't understand. Like, a lot of people don't know, but like the original thought of like gangs and all of that was literally for like community protection, because they were like small little groups of people that were being targeted in neighborhoods, and they ended up protecting themselves because the police wouldn't. And then all of a sudden it just turned into extreme hatred. I don't know what's going on.
These areas to other neighborhoods with much larger single-family houses. This would leave only the poorest people in the Million Programs projects, particularly the quickly growing migrant population. Nowadays, over 90% of Rinkeby's inhabitants have a migrant background, and over 50% of those are of African descent, particularly Somalian, a community which began arriving in Sweden as refugees after the start of the Somali Civil War in the late 80s and early 90s.
That's what it grew into.
Leading to the suburbs of these areas sometimes being referred to as Little Mogadishu. Unfortunately, according to the Swedish police, many of Järva's suburbs, including Rinkeby and the neighbouring Tensta and Husby, are at the top of Sweden's so-called vulnerable areas list. These are the areas that sometimes international media have erroneously labelled as no-go zones, but officially these are areas that have the highest levels of crime, poverty and general social exclusion from the broader society. Signs of serious social issues amongst Rinkeby's
we got places like this in the US.
In 2010, when large riots broke out in the suburb, and a few years later in 2013, similar riots started to spread to the neighbouring suburb of Husby, where at least 100 cars were burned, by this point with rioting spreading all over Stockholm. It's probably not surprising then that after drill culture began spreading from the troubled neighbourhoods of Chicago's South Side all around the world in the early 2010s, that Järva was one of the places where it took hold and inspired the local lost youths. In fact, one of the first rappers from the area to represent this style of music was an artist from the suburb of Husby called 24K, who would even use clips from the 2013 riots in his suburbs in his music videos to paint a picture of what was going on in the area. This song, with a title translating to "A Guy from the Program," would interestingly be an early showcase of some of the main enemies that we'll be discussing later in the story, showing that, as often the case in these long-running drill conflicts, there was once a time when they were all friends, appearing together in the same music videos. Here you can see two guys from the Death Patrol and two guys from the Shottaz. Masla from Death Patrol being the guy in the middle who raises a finger to his lips, along with Makalele from Death Patrol directly to the left of him wearing a black hoodie, while Hamza from the Shottaz is to the left of him and Faye from the Shottaz is there all the way to the right. This is a link-up that would later become unthinkable as these groups would descend into an all-out gang war. Now, a few different youths from Rinkeby would also begin releasing music around this time, under a movement that was called BBE, or Bin Block Entertainment. Bin commonly being a nickname for Rinkeby, meaning the village. The most known rappers from this movement are Jafar Bin and Yasin
So this
Bin.
is when the Yasin story comes in.
24K's earlier music video. These two would both later become affiliated with the group The Shottaz, but long before that gang war had emerged, they would begin dropping UK drill-inspired street freestyles and cyphers around 2014. Now, their influence came much more from the UK gangster road rap and drill rap scene, which had already begun forming in the years earlier. This is actually something that was mentioned in Jafar Bin's 2015 song Ghetto Style, where he says F Swedish hip-hop, what he's doing is more like the UK, going on to shout out legends of UK street rap like Rimsey, Nines, and Jay Spades. However, in the mid-2010s, the youngsters from Rinkeby were not just rapping about the street life. While they weren't yet hardened gang leaders, they were commonly getting involved in various criminal activities, such as robberies and drug dealing. In 2015, one particular robbery would end up causing friction between a friend group that would lead to a years-long war and would end up claiming numerous young lives. A falling out that would lead to the formation of an infamous gang that would end up sowing fear all over Northern Europe and even beyond. On the 22nd of July 2015, in the suburb of Turby, about 20 minutes drive from Rinkeby, a group of at least 4 individuals pulled a heist at a Forex exchange, getting away with cash worth about $200,000 US. This was a major lick that everybody was soon talking about in the streets of Rinkeby. By the end of that day, word had spread that a 19-year-old guy called Izzy had allegedly been the main culprit behind the operation. However, there had originally been others involved in planning this robbery. One of these guys was a 16-year-old Masla. But for whatever reason, Masla was not invited to the heist itself, which led to him feeling betrayed by Izzy for carrying the robbery out without him. Masla's friends were sharing his anger, namely Makalele, Musa, Shobra, and Talang. After the robbery that they were cut out of, they went to confront Izzy. They would end up meeting him near a subway station in Rinkeby, where things would soon escalate, eventually leading to the group taking Izzy to a nearby wooded area where one of them would end up shooting Izzy in the back while he was trying to escape through the woods. Izzy was able to stumble through the small forest.
He still got away? What? You took there was like 8 of them niggas in one dude? Yeah, this is crazy. This is crazy. This is crazy. So, okay.
Ending up in the suburb of Bromston, which is a middle-class neighborhood. Just for reference, this is like an upmarket area which is worlds apart from the projects of Rinkeby. And it's here in this upmarket neighborhood that Izzy would ultimately collapse in the yard of an older couple who would phone for help. Unfortunately, later that night, Izzy would pass away in the hospital.
En 19-årig man dog i natt efter vad vittnen uppfattat som en skottlossning i Västerort. Enligt Aftonbladet.se ska 3 skott ha avlossats i skogen mellan Rinkeby och Bromsten och 19-åringen ska ha träffats i ryggen. Polisen har inlett en förundersökning om...
Bro, imagine just being in a bed and just niggas popping up on you like that. That is insane. God, that's insane, man. It's literally just turning a beautiful town into a fucking war zone.
Mord.
And this event would cause the large group of childhood friends of all different ages to split into 2. Those who stood with Masla, who had been cut out of the robbery, and those on the inside, who had been closer to Izzy. Masla's group of close friends, who called themselves 3MST, which
so who got the 200,000?
Makan, aka Makalele, Musa, Shobra, and Talang. This is the group that would eventually be labelled the Death Patrol. Meanwhile, the friends of Izzy would eventually begin using the name Shottaz for their rival crew. But these labels for these groups wouldn't become prominent until some years later. And in the immediate aftermath of the death of Izzy, people close to him would go on the warpath, vowing to get revenge. According to later reports, the murder of Izzy acted as a watershed moment in Rinkeby gang politics, where youths formerly concerned mainly of hustling and petty crime would begin commonly carrying guns and eventually even having to wear bulletproof vests. Reports would also tell that Masla and his friends went into hiding following the shooting due to the police likely looking for them as persons of interest. Although it's not been known for sure who had ultimately been the one responsible for pulling the trigger and killing Izzy, Masla would reportedly make a call to his mother soon after Izzy's death, telling her that he feared that people were after him and that they wanted him dead. And these fears turned out to be valid, because not even 48 hours later, Masla and his friends were ambushed at a gas station in the middle of the night. Unfortunately, Masla was shot in the head and later pronounced dead at hospital. The police and the Swedish media were quickly drawing a connection between both of these murders. and security camera footage from the scene would show 2 possible suspects running away from the gas station. The police would eventually find some compelling evidence pointing to Izzy's 2 older brothers as being involved in the murder, but they were eventually excluded from the investigation without ever being charged due to lack of evidence. In an act of reconciliation by the families and the broader Rinkeby community, both Izzy and Maslow were buried next to each other. But this post-murder gesture would do little to calm down the escalating situation between these former friends now at war. Meanwhile, Maslow's friends like Makalele, Musa, Shobra, and Talang were soon caught out of town in connection with another completely unrelated investigation. So for the time being, this crew was momentarily broken up, as many of those involved were sent to so-called special youth detention centers, since there are no youth prisons in Sweden. Now, this is because the government are apparently aiming to reduce the detrimental effects of time spent in prison by young people. Now, let's see how that turns out over the course of the rest of this story. But the sentences in these centers are relatively short, and already by the end of 2015, these gang comrades would all be reunited, and then they would continue to commit crimes, including robberies, home invasions, carjackings, and drug dealing. Now, eventually, all of those crimes would land these members in full-blown adult prisons, briefly lowering the temperature in the streets of Rinkeby. But soon, the war on those streets
who took the streets over? Because that's what happens. A young nigga grew up and it was like, wait a second,
while the infamous
ain't nobody out here really running it no more. It's my turn.
Izzy's friends, who begun calling themselves the Shottaz, had started to take over the streets of Rinkeby. Also, musical artists from Rinkeby, who would eventually become associated with the Shottaz, were also on the rise. But at this point, they were still largely staying impartial to the brewing feud in the streets. For example, Yasin's rap career was blowing up. Already in 2015, he had signed his first record deal and dropped his first official single, the self-titled track, Yasin. Then, in 2016, Yasin, together with Jafar Bin and other rappers from the Yoruba suburbs, created a rap collective called Ghetto Superstars, which began creating some significant buzz in the national scene. Besides Jafar and Yasin, the collective would also include rappers like Blizzy, Dree Low from Husby, Monty B, Elias Abbas from Rinkeby, as well as ZE from Tensta. Some of these guys like Dree Low and ZE would end up becoming some of the biggest rappers in Sweden. Also in 2016, Yasin would release one of his most popular songs, a track with the title translating to My Hood, together with a music video directed by acclaimed director Saga Berlin, who has also directed the music video for the song Tabanya by another Rinkeby-based artist called Cherie. Now, both of these music videos provide an excellent window into the world of Rinkeby at this time, with high-quality on-the-ground and drone footage showcasing the brutalist architecture in these suburbs in all of its glory. For the first time, the music coming out of these areas was giving the world and the country a window into life in the suburbs. Jafar Bin, on the other hand, who still in 2015 was shouting out Shobra, one of the core members of Death Patrol, in his songs, would actually end up taking the Shottaz side in the beef in the years following the death of Izzy. And this taking of sides would also be reflected in his music, eventually landing him in hot water with the Death Patrol. But before the beef would escalate to the next level, during the summer and fall of 2016, Makalele, Musa, Shobra, and Talang had gotten free once again. However, they hadn't been seen in Rinkeby, as they had reportedly been banned from the area by Shottaz members and were spending time in the city of Malmö instead, making contacts in the streets there. However, they still had allies in Rinkeby who acted as their eyes and ears back on their native block. But while that was going on, the Shottaz, who had lost many of their members as a result of a number of arrests after a recent large robbery, put them at a disadvantage in the streets. On the evening of December the 2nd, an alleged member of the Shottaz, called Indiana, along with his brother Smokey, were at a local cafe in Rinkeby, without realizing that a friend of their ops had eyes on them. Suddenly, out of nowhere, an automatic machine gun would spray up the windows of the cafe, making people inside hit the floor and panic. Indiana and Smokey would react fast, running into the back of the cafe in an attempt to escape through a back door. Unfortunately, they would end up getting trapped in the wrong room. Unable to escape, the gunmen would rush into the cafe, shooting both brothers, leaving them dead on the spot. After this brazen double murder, the situation would turn tense.
They shot it up and still ran in to get him down too?
At the scene of the crime. Unsurprisingly, following this incident, the police would once again struggle to catch any of the suspects following the murders, partly due to witnesses of the event either being vague about who and what they had seen, or plainly uncooperative. I guess the no snitching rule applies in Sweden too. In reality, many of the locals likely knew very well just who had been behind this brutal attack, but many were scared to share any information with the authorities. A week later, these two murdered brothers were laid to rest in front of a large crowd and media presence.
Inte bara de vi begraver. Wallahi, låt oss begrava våra dåliga beteende också idag. Låt oss begrava vårat hat och vårat krig med varandra. De som vill hämnas, tror ni de här grabbarna, våra bröder, tror ni att de här behöver att någon hämnas för dem?
And at this point, the Swedish media were already reporting on how every 10th homicide in the country was linked to the suburbs of Järva. Unfortunately, despite the police not being able to catch anyone, in the streets, revenge would come swiftly. Only about 2 weeks after the double murder, Musa would check himself in at a hospital in Stockholm with gunshot wounds to his lower body. Fortunately, he had worn a bulletproof vest that had stopped shots hitting his upper body, likely saving his life. Police would later gather that he had been targeted at a parking garage in the suburbs of Hulsta, near Rinkeby, in the early morning hours. Once police arrived at the crime scene, Musa had already left for the hospital, but at the scene, they would find 2 AK-47s and a car full of bullet holes with at least 40 shell casings. Unfortunately, Musa had returned to Stockholm with one of their new friends from Malmö, a man named Atto, aka A2, who was connected to gang members in Malmö who would later be known as Los Suecos, or the Swedes, a crew of contract killers who murdered numerous people in Spain. Atto was also an alleged drug dealer with connections on both sides of the conflict in Rinkeby. Those connections would end up costing him his life, as later that day, Atto would allegedly end up meeting a guy called A from the Shottaz side to allegedly collect a debt owed to him by Indiana, who had just been killed. Security cameras would reportedly capture Atto walking with A and another guy to a wooded area when Atto was suddenly shot, after which A and the other man would continue walking as if nothing had happened, leaving Atto seriously injured on the ground. The next day, he would unfortunately pass away from his injuries, while the police would arrest A and his friend for questioning. But despite the police seemingly knowing exactly how these latest murders were a result of the death of Izzy in 2015, there was once again not enough evidence to charge A or anybody else, making this yet another unsolved case.
Didn't they just say they got it on camera? Like, what are we talking about?
Following Atto's death, the locals in Järva had had enough of the killing.
So
and they would gather for a demonstration against the escalating violence. Sadly, this wouldn't make a difference, and it wouldn't take long from here for the bloodshed in the streets to begin spilling into the music. Seemingly describes his last meeting with Izzy after the Forex robbery, describing seeing Izzy and his accomplices with an apparent 2 million Swedish krona in cash, with Jafar implying that Izzy had even predicted that he would end up in jail or dying by the gun. Then, some months later in July, Jafar features on another rapper's song, which translates to No Man's Land, where he mentions one of the main members of Shottaz, Faye, or Frankie, who was locked up at the time, implying how Faye had told him that once he gets out, the Shottaz will
got Jaguars?
However, there was a problem. Had now allegedly broadened their criminal enterprise and taken part in their first contract killing. The group was also allegedly tightening their grip on the drug markets around Rinkeby. At this point, they would now have the money to bring in large quantities of dope and a deadly reputation as a group not to be messed with. Their reputation would further gain infamy as the Swedish news media would in May, for the first time, introduce this gang under the name Death Patrol, in an article which discussed checking him, seemingly threatening him with a gun, beating him, and
let's lock in.
Forcing would punch and kick Jafar whilst dissing him on camera, and then they would go on to film themselves into his face as they continue to beat him. This was a disturbing act of humiliation, which would unfortunately become a trend in Swedish gang politics going forward. During this confrontation, they would continually ask Jafar where his friend Yasin was, before saying that they would get all of the Shottaz affiliated rappers, one by one. Soon after this event, Clips of this video were published on social media, with people on a popular Swedish online forum Flashback soon discussing and collecting these clips, with frenzied comments all about this infamous gang supposedly behind the attack, describing them as the craziest gang in the entire village, with some even claiming that the OG gangsters in the area respect these bloodthirsty youngsters and that they are all wanted by the Swedish police. Soon after, also the mainstream news were covering this event, describing this incident as an abuse attack on a Swedish rapper.
And it was
Jafar
on
would
IG.
also post his own response, where he would explain how the incident happened due to the lyrics on his song Gold Rush. Soon after the video leaked, people on the Flashback forum would begin posting that Jafar's brother had responded to the attackers, threatening them by writing that when he sees them, it's on sight, together with gun emojis. These so-called humiliation robberies have become increasingly common in Sweden in recent years, with other rappers being targeted as well. And according to some, as a result of the country's immigration policies,
so this is when he's going to get
on
into
the
the one
Flashback
with,
forum, and later reportedly confirmed
talk
by
about
police
how,
reports,
what's his name, Basala and
McCann,
isn't
aka
it?
Makalele, would actually end up running into Yasin that summer, beating him unconscious outside of a fast food spot in Rinkeby. After being beaten up and humiliated, both Shottaz affiliates, Jafar and Yasin, began reportedly getting much more involved in the gang lifestyle. As can be seen in pictures taken in September 2017 that police later found in a confiscated phone, where Jafar
I'm out
could be seen
here
wearing a white hoodie.
I can't fight, so we got to bring the straps out. That's basically what happened. Jesus Christ.
Is pictured holding an automatic rifle, as well as later photos taken by police after Jafar had been arrested, where he had been out wearing a bulletproof vest. At this point, the disrespect had gone to new levels, completely unimaginable at the start of this beef, and those rappers who were gang affiliated would begin to get more and more deeply entrenched in the ongoing gang war, bringing yet more violence and police attention to the growing gangster rap scene in Sweden. By fall 2017, the police in Stockholm were beginning to take the war between the Shottaz and the Death Patrol much more seriously. Particularly the core members of the Death Patrol, whose every move were being followed closely by the police, as well as the growing mass of Swedish gangster rap fans. During this time, these gangsters would travel within Sweden, as well as abroad in different countries, such as the UK, Spain, and the Netherlands, where they were either spending their street and rap money on vacations, flexing their jet-set lifestyles on social media, or, as the police were increasingly suspecting, doing international deals to further the success of their illicit enterprise. They were also allegedly creating new contacts with other gangs in Sweden,
so they
such
thought
as the
them boys was
terrifying
really,
Hit Squad,
really
the
getting
so-called
connected.
League, also known as the Tensta Network. In October 2017, police would move in and arrest the core members of the gang for the contract killing of Nabil. However, once again, there seemingly wasn't enough evidence to charge them, and in the end, everyone was let go. Even Shobra, whose DNA was even found on the murder weapon according to prosecutors. However, before all of the Death Patrol members were freed, their rival the Shottaz would take advantage of their absence and make a move, targeting the little brother of Masla, one of the deceased 3 MST members who originally founded the group that eventually became the Death Patrol. Nicknamed Machiavelli after Tupac's famous pseudonym, he had become involved with the Death Patrol after his brother's death. On the 23rd of October, Shottaz members ambushed Machiavelli in Rinkeby and shot him with an automatic rifle. Fortunately, due to his bulletproof vest, Machiavelli only received mild injuries, and soon the media would get wind of the shooting being connected to the Death Patrol and reporting on this feud being responsible for a dozen murders at this point. It seemed that the war was heating up once more, and the media were reporting on the violence as it happened. But then, during the final months of 2017, the Swedish police—
they're that good when people don't know how to shoot. But yeah, if they actually are kept up and the bulletproof vest has never been like dropped or anything like that, and they take care of it, it definitely helps.
Seemed to finally get a breakthrough in shutting down the Death Patrol's activities. First, they would reportedly catch Makalele, aka Maka, who they would find in the backseat of his girlfriend's car, armed with a handgun and a bulletproof vest. He would end up being slapped with a 1-year and 4-month prison sentence for traffic, weapons, and drug charges. Then, not much later, the police would catch Musa and Talang in a car near Rinkeby after a high-speed chase. On Musa, the police would find an open phone that had information that ended up leading them to a large drug bust, catching dozens of kilos of amphetamines as well as thousands of ecstasy pills. Once again, the media was quick to report on their new favorite gang and the enormous bust that had been made, but the members would deny the charges. And once again, despite the best efforts of the Swedish authorities, it wouldn't take long for the Death Patrol and their ops to bring bloody violence back to the streets of Sweden.
Jesus. This is when they started kidnapping.
At last, the police seem to have caught a
we
break,
still ain't got
and
to the
3
kidnap
core
yet.
members of the Death Patrol were at
That
least
was
momentarily taken off
2021?
the streets. Meanwhile, the 4th major player in the gang, Shobra, had escaped the situation to Spain. Here, the Death Patrol had reportedly established some major connections with local criminal organizations. However, this meant that their associates in the streets of Rinkeby would be left without their enforcers. One of these was a young man named Kara, who was an old friend of Masla. Kara had been convicted in 2015 of another robbery which had been carried out around the same time as the infamous Forex robbery, where Masla had in fact been one of the suspects. Kara was apparently also close with Masla's little brother, Machiavelli, and had recently even been the person who drove him to the hospital after he had been shot. Now, it was this association that very well may have put him on the Shottaz hit list, because on New Year's Eve, Kara was found dead in a parking garage in Rinkeby, having been shot 8 times, including in the head, and dying at the scene. In the days that followed, Kara's friends and family would create a memorial for him at the site of the murder, with the core members of the Death Patrol off the streets for the time being, and another one of their associates dead. It seemed at this point that the deadly war for Sweden's streets was tipping in the Shottaz' favour, but the younger members of the Death Patrol were desperate to prove themselves to the older guys like Machiavelli that they had what it takes to become so-called 100 guys. This is a term used to describe loyal, young soldiers who were ready to do 4 years in a closed youth home for committing an underage homicide. They knew that the Swedish state wouldn't punish these younger members for acts of violence, and they would carry their willingness to crash out as a badge of honor. About a week after Kara's death, on the 8th of January 2018, Shottaz affiliate Hamza, also known as Peps,
well, when the
was
other
hanging
guys are
out at
15,
Rinkeby
I mean, they're
Centre.
definitely
According
older.
to some, Hamza was not much involved with the gang life, which is why he actually felt safe hanging out in the middle of Rinkeby. The police would later find out some interesting messages that his girlfriend had sent him, suggesting that even she wanted to be part of the alluring gang lifestyle. There were also rumors circulating that Hamza had actually given the location of Kara to Shottaz members for his murder, which had ultimately made him a target. After hanging out in the center of town for some time, Hamza went to eat at a local pizza place, where he would meet some friends. However, at this point, Hamza had seemingly been followed by affiliates of the Death Patrol, including people who were already in.
How do they be talking all this shit? Do niggas really be thinking that like online is like just that different than being like real life? Because how the fuck are you online talking about killing and murdering people, and then you just going to go pull up to a goddamn kebab shop by yourself? And then you that stupid, you don't even know niggas is following you out there. Like, what is going on, bro? I just don't get it. What the fuck is going on?
Side of the restaurant. Then, at around 7:30 p.m, security cameras would capture somebody walking confidently into the pizza place, entering the door just as somebody else was exiting. At this point, they would immediately raise a handgun, shooting Hamza twice in the head and neck, and immediately running away. Soon after the brazen execution, photos taken of Hamza's lifeless body would begin spreading on social media, and the news would begin to report of both the murder and the fact that the gang war had continued to play out on social media. The police were first suspecting Kara's older brother for the murder, and they started surveilling and tapping his phone, where they would hear him imply
I'd let that nigga go for sure. I'd be like, oh, thank you God you didn't open fire before I left.
Just as they took one from me, I took one from them, and vowing to continue to get it back in blood for his gang. While being surveilled, Kara's brother would have a meeting with a man named Dumle. This was a Death Patrol affiliate who would later become a notorious figure in the gang, along with a 16-year-old boy named Shaki, who was one of the young people in Rinkeby allegedly selling drugs for the Death Patrol.
This the King Von dude.
The police would find interesting similarities with the shooter,
he's like the Swedish King Von,
matching gloves and shoes. Further search warrants on different locations would also uncover a cache of serious firearms, one of them actually turning out to be the murder weapon, where Shaki's DNA was also found. Police would also find messages between Shaki and the core members of the Death Patrol, indicating that the underage boy was used as a contract killer by the gang, knowing that he would receive a much shorter sentence, earning him the status as a 100 guy. At least partly due to the huge disparity in adult and underage sentencing, using these so-called child soldiers would increasingly become common amongst Sweden's gangsters. Shaki would eventually be found guilty, becoming the first to actually be convicted of murder in this war that had so far claimed so many lives. But, of course, as an underage offender, he would only receive 3 years in a closed youth home, even 1 year less than the 4-year maximum. In many ways, Sweden's liberal and empathetic approach to crime was creating an obstacle.
How you walk into a public place and shoot a nigga in his head and get 3 years? What?
To the authorities tackling the serious violence playing out on their streets. But ironically,
that's what's so crazy. This is why it's so wild to me that like they not attacking the government way more, bro. Because what the fuck? They gotta be working with the streets, bro. Somebody's agenda is getting pushed by these niggas killing themselves. And that's exactly how America works.
it would take the war spilling into a neighbouring country for the perpetrators to be punished with the full force of the law. But for the time being, the Swedish authorities would continue their losing battle, as they would continue to attempt to get some of the most high-profile gangster rappers off of the streets. While this was all going on, Shottaz rappers Jafar Bin and Yasin were increasingly getting involved in the conflict in the streets, and they were actively using their music to taunt their ops. In December 2017, Jafar released a song called Shottaz, where he raps in depth about the deaths of Indiana and his brother Smokey that had happened a year before. He would also shout out other Shottaz members and threatening their ops for a major revenge that was coming, going as far as to say that he will kill 10 people to get back for his brother's deaths. In January 2018, however, Jafar was unaware that the police had begun to tap his phone as well, and during one phone call, he and others would admit that they were driving around armed and ready to slide, causing the police to tail them and perform a stop and search. But the car would momentarily get away, and when police finally did stop them, there were no guns in the car to be found. However, Jafar had clearly not realized at this point that his phone was still under surveillance, and he would later explain during another phone call where exactly the guns had been thrown out during their getaway. The police would ultimately find these guns and even more guns that were hidden in a garage, including the automatic rifle that he was holding in the picture the police had found on a phone. In the end, Jafar would also end up getting a 4-year sentence after being caught in the sting operation. But this setback wouldn't seemingly diminish his commitment to the gang, as can be seen from his later letters sent from prison, where he would vow his loyalty to the Shottaz and writing lyrics about his plans for revenge, saying, "If you stand in my way, you will be buried shortly. We will take revenge." In March 2018, not long after Jafar's run-ins with the police that had turned into a lengthy prison sentence, a detective from the Stockholm Police's new gang unit, Team 2022, were at a gas station when he saw Yasin in a car together with Shottaz members Poi and Faye. During the encounter, Poi would attempt to run off, in the process pulling out a gun, forcing the detective to fire his gun before throwing his gun to the ground and surrendering. Meanwhile, Yasin would also take off, but the police would later find a gun that the rapper had tossed away during his escape. This incident would make Yasin a wanted man, and when he found out the police were on his tail, he would make a brazen post on social media, posting a picture of himself with a designer scarf covering his face, along with the text, "Catch me if you can," along with hashtag FTP, fuck the police. While hiding out from the police, Yasin was still creating a big buzz in the Swedish rap scene, and he would capitalize on comparisons to other American drill rappers who had evaded the law by dropping a new song and music video titled Chicago, which currently stands at over 8 million views. The song compares Stockholm to the home of drill music, Chicago, and has appropriately themed lyrics about guns and violence. But more specifically, the song begins with lyrics where Yasin mentions multiple Shottaz members by name, including Faye, A, and Poi. He also makes reference to a garage and sending someone to Allah. The garage reference was taken by some to refer to the murder of their Death Patrol rival Kara just some months earlier, with there even being fan theories on social media that Yasin may have been the shooter. In the second verse, Yasin continues to refer to his Shottaz gang, saying, "Rest in peace Indiana, who was killed in the cafe in Rinkeby," as well as showing a picture of him in the music video.
But he
and going on to shout out yet another member, his manager Frankie,
niggas in the middle of a goddamn
sits next to him in the video. In that music video, Yasin is wearing the same scarf as in the earlier social media post, and there are several people in the background whose faces are blurred out. Now, it seems that Yasin was taking full advantage of his status as a gang-related wanted man by the police, but despite the clout that he was picking up in the gangster rap scene, all of this attention would wind up being a liability, and not long after that video's release, Yasin would be arrested. Like Jafar, Yasin was convicted of firearms offences, as well as other smaller crimes, and sent to prison. For a rapper on his way to the top of the Swedish rap scene, going to prison was undoubtedly a huge setback, but at the time, Yasin couldn't have known that this prison sentence would likely save his life, as soon the deadly violence would continue, this time spilling even beyond the borders of Sweden.
Beyond the borders? The Copenhagen
2019, the only core member of the Death Patrol who wasn't locked up was Makalele, aka Maka, who had recently completed his sentence for the firearm offence. Even though the prosecutor reportedly wanted him jailed immediately after the filmed assault of Jafar, even with all of that on camera, once again, there was seemingly not enough evidence to actually convict him. After getting out, Makalele begun gathering the remaining Death Patrol members, who had largely formed the younger generation of the Järva boys that the core Death Patrol members had recruited, who were also going by the name the Hulster Children. This included people like Makalele's little brother AZ and his friends Panda and Abe, who idolized the older guys in the gang and wanted to replicate their gangster image in the streets. However, with many of the main people from both sides of the war being out of the picture, for a moment it seemed like things may have cooled down a little bit. In March, Shobra is released from jail after the police failed to tie him to the large drug bust that took down Musa and Talak. Sometime after, he seemingly returns to Spain to maintain his connections down there. Even with all of the police attention, the members of both of these gangs were global and seemingly able to move between borders freely. Unfortunately, this would mean the downfall for certain members on both sides. As in June 2019, Yasin's manager Faye, aka Frankie, travels to Denmark together with 2 other Shottaz members, Gucci and Hoods, with the apparent aim of meeting local people there from the rap music business. In reality, it would turn out that they had been tricked by Makelele and his crew, who end up ambushing the trio at a parking lot in Herlev, a suburb on the outskirts of Denmark's capital, Copenhagen. Makan and his crew would begin shooting at their car with an automatic rifle and handguns. Faye and Hoods would take off running, and Hoods is able to escape unharmed, but Faye would be hit in the thigh, beginning to bleed profusely while running away from the shooters. He would jump into a bush and hide there, managing to get away from the shooters who returned to their car. There, Gucci, who was unable to escape, would fall into the grass near the car with severe gunshot wounds. At that point, a man runs back to the car and returns fire with an automatic rifle, shooting Gucci over a dozen times more from close distance, killing him on the spot, whilst another attacker filmed it. After the shooting, the Death Patrol members can be seen on video jumping into their car and speeding off from the scene, leaving Gucci's body on the ground to be found by police, whilst Faye is bleeding out nearby, later passing away from his injuries. Their getaway car would later be found intact after an unsuccessful attempt to light it on fire. Now, the failure to burn this car that was used in the murder would turn out to be a costly mistake, providing the Danish investigators ample DNA evidence. A few days later, the Denmark police would get a tip that one of the shooters is hiding in an apartment in the city of Aarhus, around 3 hours away from the crime scene. And there, they end up catching up with none other than Makelele, who was filmed by a bystander whilst attempting to avoid the capture by hanging from a balcony. 4 weeks later, the other suspects would all be caught back in Stockholm, Sweden, at which point they were swiftly extradited back to Denmark, beginning a long wait for trial. The Death Patrol at this point had been written about in the media for several years, but the shocking events in Denmark cemented their notoriety in the media. In a country where such gangster celebrities were a relatively new phenomenon, the discourse would sometimes reach
as soon as they got this news, it was over.
This insane column would be written viral. Pondered whether the Gucci brand had some kind of responsibility to act and condemn members of the Death Patrol, often dressed in the designer brand. When it finally came time for the trial and sentencing, the Death Patrol members would find out just how bad they messed up by crossing the border to commit these murders. Denmark has been much quicker to act with regards to their own gang problems, and the country would have much harsher penalties for these gangsters than Sweden, with law in certain cases allowing the sentence to be doubled if the crime is proven to be gang-related. In the end, Makan and the 2 other older members would end up getting life sentences, whilst 2 younger guys, who were still both 17 years old at the time of the crime, would end up getting 20 years each. In Sweden, the younger members, or 100 guys, would have likely received much more lenient sentences, typically 3 or 4 years in a youth home. However, as of 2022, due to these laws that prevented underage people from getting serious prison time, Swedish laws are now being rewritten due to the exploitation of these young offenders as hitmen. However, even in Denmark, the sentences of the youngest members made history by being the first sentences of that length being given to
they
underage
literally
offenders.
got made an example out of. That's crazy.
Before bringing their armed conflicts across their
and then
borders.
they just kept doing
However,
that shit.
After an appeal, the youngsters' sentences were eventually lowered to 16 years.
That's still their whole life. They're gonna be 40 when they get out.
They would have received had they done the murders in Sweden. Unfortunately, even these sentences haven't been enough to stop the gang from further operating in Denmark, and the Danish news would go on to report that the Death Squad had actually built official alliances with local gang sets there. But for now, it seemed that Sweden's most dangerous gangsters had been taken off the streets. Funnily enough, thanks to the Danish authorities. However, naturally, this wouldn't be the end of the warfare, and moving forward, the remaining members of the Shottaz and the Death Patrol would continue their bloody campaign for Get Back.
And there's what, 3 left? Well, them little boys, I guess. Jesus Christ, dude.
Back in the suburbs of Rinkeby, Shottaz members
would not
enraged
stop
after the murders of Faye and Gucci, and it was clear that somebody would have to pay in blood. With the Swedish news reporting the authorities had labelled the gang situation as a code red and describing a revenge spiral that had resulted in yet more murders in the community. In the following weeks, there were several violent incidents taking place in Järva. In one of these incidents, a Death Patrol affiliate was beaten badly and a video of the attack was posted online. And then, one night in August, the younger generation of the Shottaz, or the so-called filterless guys, ended up allegedly running into a brother of a Death Patrol member called Capone. After beating the brother up, they forced him to call Capone and ask him to come to where they were, a wooded area in Tensta. But Capone worked out what was going on, refusing to come, knowing likely what would happen to him. Later on, Capone's brother would be found shot to death in that wooded area. The police would later allegedly arrest 5 people suspected of being involved in the murder, one of these men allegedly being Hoods, who had just survived the Death Patrol's assassination attempt in Denmark. But once again, there wasn't enough evidence and no one would be charged in the end. However, years later, in 2022, Yasin would rap in the song V4, implying that hoods had indeed gotten some get back. In November 2019, Yasin was released from prison after finishing his sentence for the firearm and other lesser offences. While he had been locked up, the Swedish gangster rap scene had exploded, partly due to Einar's huge popularity. And even from behind bars, Yasin had also become one of the country's most popular artists. Shortly after his release, Yasin headed to Milano, Italy with his friends, including alleged Shottaz members, to shoot a big-budget music video for his new song, DSGIS, which translates to What is Hidden in the Snow. Yasin begins the song by calling to free a bunch of Shottaz members, including JB, aka Jafar Bin, and Far, the brother of Faye, who had been doing a long sentence while the war in Rinkeby had been raging. In the music video, there's a number of other Shottaz members present, such as Yasin's longtime friend Poi, aka Vincent. In December, he would release an EP with the hilarious title, which translates to Hand Under Mona Lisa's Skirt, where he again shouts out Far, as well as saying Rest in Peace Frankie, aka Faye. And then, in a surprising turn of events, only a few days after this EP's release, and right before New Year's Eve, Poi, who had just featured in Yasin's music video, was found in a car at a parking lot in Rinkeby with multiple gunshot wounds. He was taken to a hospital, but his condition was severe, eventually only being kept alive with a ventilator, and sadly, the following day, his father would post on Facebook revealing that his son had indeed passed away. Shortly after Poi was found, the police arrested several people, 2 near the scene and others in a car near downtown Stockholm. One of the people arrested in the car was Yasin himself, with news reporting the arrest of the Swedish rap star. Apparently, all of the arrested were members of the Shottaz gang. Yasin explained to police that he had actually been sitting in the car with Poi when suddenly someone had opened the door on the driver's side, shooting Poi. Yasin claimed that he would then take off running, believing that he had been the true target of the attack. Yasin was found to have some gunshot residue on him, which made his story seem questionable, but that alone didn't really help the police understand what had happened. And in spring of 2020, Yasin and the rest of the Shottaz members were finally released. But that didn't stop rumours that Poi had actually been killed due to an internal conflict within the gang, with the news even pointing out the peculiar detail that Poi's name was not celebrated on social media following his death. Fellow Shottaz didn't contact his family with condolences. Soon after this, Yasin would release his debut album, 980111, named after his birthday. The album again has several Shottaz references, like in the song Young and Heartless, where Yasin once again shout-outs his murdered friend and manager Frankie, aka Faye, as well as describing how the Shottaz are Stockholm's finest gangsters. There's also other songs where he talks about how his brothers are trying to even the score and leave people brainless. This album was a huge success and reached #1 on Sweden's top album chart, holding the position for 4 weeks. But while Yasin was enjoying his freedom as one of Sweden's top rappers, the events
How does he get a #1 record
in his songs
after doing all this shit?
Despite their main ops from the Death Patrol now largely being locked up, in July 2020, Shaki, who had killed Hamza in the pizza place in Rinkeby at the beginning of 28 and was now spending his last moments in the youth home where he had been sentenced, was helped to escape the youth home by 2 accomplices during a supervised leave. And then, in August, Shobra was once again arrested in Spain, this time with his brother, nicknamed City, both who were suspected of organising a large smuggling operation for the Death Patrol. Also in August, another Shottaz-affiliated member was shot to death in Rinkeby by 2 people on a motorbike, in what Swedish police described as an execution of a gang leader. The victim was a man called Captain, who was the alleged leader of the Shottaz younger faction, the so-called FLG, or Filterless Guys. The murder was rumoured to have been connected to their beef with another gang, the Husby's Hyenas, from the nearby suburb of Husby. Interestingly, Yasin, not too long ago, had done a song together with the rapper Dre Low, who was allegedly a prominent affiliate of the gang from Husby. Reportedly, the police were looking into a recent music video that the rapper had released about a week before the murder. A music video which appeared to portray the murder plot, with one scene where 3 men are looking at a photo of their future victim on a phone screen, with the police trying to determine if the person shown on the phone screen was in fact Captain. Apparently the image was ultimately too blurry to make any definitive conclusions, but this video seemingly sent a message. It appeared that the conflicts in the suburbs of were getting increasingly messy and complex, with Swedish news describing the Husby Hyenas being at war with the Filterless Guys and suggesting that children had been given money and weapons to wage war by the older members. In the midst of all of this violence in the streets, unsurprisingly, the gangster rap wave in Sweden was booming. In October, Yasin released another album,
nobody be outside in the music videos.
An interesting cover depicting himself bloodied with a bag full of arrows. The album continues on the same gangster rap style as his earlier releases, although with a much more mainstream sound. Still, in the song On Sight, he would rap in the chorus how the war remains active and how he's a criminal for life, implying that this gang war will continue going on and on. However, already the next month, he would release a song with a singer called Miriam Bryant with the title translating to Give Up Again, a genuine mainstream pop song which received huge mainstream success, actually becoming #1 on Spotify Sweden's top 50 list with almost 500,000 plays in 24 hours and maintaining the top spot for weeks. Soon after this, Yasin would appear on the Swedish public service broadcaster show focused on pop culture, where he would indicate that he had left the criminal gang life behind for good at this point. It seemed that finally, at the height of his career, Yasin may have actually been able to escape the gang life that took so many of his friends in such a short time. But unfortunately, not long after, exactly 1 year after Poy's death on New Year's Eve, Yasin was once again arrested. But this time, the reason was even more surprising, as he was suspected of taking part in a plot to kidnap the rival up-and-coming rap star Einar. And it's hard to explain just how serious this situation is. These were two of the biggest gang-affiliated rap stars in Sweden at this point, with one Reddit post describing the situation as if Drake had been arrested for the kidnapping of Travis Scott, or the Tory and Meghan shooting situation, only much wilder. The baby-faced Swedish gangster rapper Einar had built a serious buzz for himself in the years preceding his tragic fate. However, his position in the gangster rap scene and his proximity to real gangsters running the suburbs of Sweden was both part of the appeal and a serious threat. Spending time during his come-up in the Dalen district in Stockholm, he would rub shoulders with the infamous street crew, the Dalen Network, building a friendship with an alleged former leader of the Dalen Network, Patty, who became Einar's manager, along with another alleged member called Chapo. As you now know, in 2018, Patty would be killed, with the allegations that Chapo was responsible, ultimately leading to a trial where Chapo would beat all the charges. And now you know more about the bloody and years-long gang war that followed, it's no surprise then that Einar's position at the top of the Swedish drill community would be contentious. The later rumors were that the Dalen Network, who allegedly were involved in the early career of Einar, had become resentful towards the rapper after his career had blown up. Apparently, they had been left out of lucrative deals. Later, extensive police reports would reveal exactly what had happened. Much of these revelations were based on the fact that just as Einar's kidnapping was being planned, the police in Europe had gained access to messages between thousands of criminals who had been using an encrypted communication network made by the company called EncroChat. These messages showed that between the 30th and 31st of March 2020, Yasin was working together with members from both the Dalen and Vorby networks to kidnap Einar. Yasin's job in the plan was to lure Einar, who thought that the two were on good terms with him, to a location where he could be kidnapped. Later messages would provide a shocking revelation, when one of the people involved in the plan would write a message saying that Yasin will do Einar like Poy, implying that Yasin had indeed lured his childhood friend out the night that he was murdered. However, on the night that Yasin was supposed to lure Einar to a specific location, he would get paranoid after he was stopped by the police in the early morning of the 31st of March during a visit to a 7-Eleven. After a taxi driver had reported giving a ride to a group of nervously acting men who possibly had a weapon. After this search, at this stop, the police would indeed find a gun on Yasin. But this gun would turn out actually to be a replica, which Yasin had claimed he was only carrying for a music video shoot. Also that night, another gang member involved in the plan, a former youth soccer star, Ilya Djurkovic, who had played in Sweden's under-17 national team before suffering an injury and getting deep into the gang life with the Vorby network, would find the police snooping around his apartment, making him suspicious. After these events, the gang would decide to abort the initial kidnapping plan. A few days later, the leader of the Vorby network, Jihab Lamauri, would indicate that they had located his longtime nemesis, Mikael Jokana, and Yasin was notified that Einar's kidnapping plans were to be put on hold. In reality, however, the plans moved on, but this time with the help of the rapper Haval. It was now Haval's turn, together with members of the Dalen network that Einar had previously associated with, to lure Einar into a specific apartment where members of the Vorby network would be waiting. Astonishingly, shortly after midnight on the 15th of April, as Haval, Einar, and members of the Dalen network, including the leader, Mario Golzarmir, were driving towards the apartment, the police would once again make a stop. Unfortunately, everyone in the car seemed to be in good spirits at this point, and after telling the crew to kick one person out of the car to bring the number of people traveling in it to a safe 5 passengers, the cops then allowed them to continue their journey. This stop by the police happened only 100 meters away from their destination. Inside the apartment they were going to, members of the Vorby network were waiting, armed with the various weapons, as well as props that they were planning on using to humiliate Einar. Once again, in another shocking display of brutality that I have never seen in any gang story from Australia to Chicago, these gangsters would hold Einar captive, forcing him to dress up in women's clothing and drink from a dog bowl amid beatings whilst photographs.
What? You had to kill me. You had to kill me. Why? What? Take him out of my, hey, bro, shoot, bro. Shoot, bro. I'm just here. You just gonna have to take me out, man.
Were taken. The motive was to use these photos to extort the rapper for money. They would also post a photo of a gun and a Rolex Day-Day that they had seemingly taken from Einar. After the members of the Vorby network were done humiliating and torturing Einar, he was then taken by Haval and some others to a location where he would further hand them a gun and 2 golden chains, which Haval would then proudly wear in a picture posted to an accomplice. Shockingly,
why would he do that to his own homie?
And Einar would be dropped the very next day on April the 16th, along with the rapper Abidaz, making it seem as if nothing had happened between them. But in reality, things were far from fine, and after the kidnapping, the members were also planning on planting a bomb at Einar or one of his family members' homes, with the police reports mentioning how guys like Mario Golzarmia were stopped by the police near Einar's house in the weeks following the kidnapping. Then, in May, the perpetrators made the decision that their extortion plan was not going to work, and these pictures of Einar were published on social media through various channels. However, according to the police, an Instagram account by the name of Shobra the Don, named after the real Instagram account of Shobra from the Death Patrol, may well have been the first account to post these photos. This same account also tagged the location in some of these pictures as Rinkeby and posted a censored photo of 3 Death Patrol members, including Shaki, who was still in closed youth care for the murder of Hamza, and Abe, who was already arrested for the murders of Faye and Gucci. Seemingly, this was a half-hearted attempt to actually frame the Death Patrol for the crime, or perhaps it was just trolling. On the popular Swedish discussion forum Flashback, which also acts as a kind of Swedish version of Chiracology, where real crime and gang-related cases are discussed in depth, the news of Einar's kidnapping quickly became a popular topic on the forum, with rumors spreading that Einar was even assaulted in the attack, with many trolls on the forum.
That's what they said, that he got his butt taken or something.
Some people were happy about what had happened to Einar due to the fact that a lot of his haters felt that he was faking his gangster image and suggesting that he had now gotten a real taste of the lifestyle that he claimed to live, with one commenter saying, "Thug life, surely that's what he wanted, now he got his way, congratulations." There was also immediately much speculation about who had been behind the kidnapping, with one of the first suspects rather randomly being none other than Leo Chinese Carmona, the founder of Sweden's first gangster rap group Kartellen, the Cartel. However, despite numerous possible culprits being discussed and speculated about,
so he was that deep into it? What was he like? What did he have, like 1 foot in, 1 foot out? And they was like, oh, okay, bet. Since you don't want to, you know what I'm saying, let us in on these big racks, then we just gonna take you out. I'm so fucking confused. Like, I am so confused. Like, why, bro?
Shut down. Einar himself would reply to the media storm.
It's because he had all the attention.
He simply stated, anyone can get kidnapped, and that this wasn't going to change or stop anything.
Yo, vad händer Instagram, eran broder här. Walla, jag har en sak att säga till er bara. Alla där ute kan bli kidnappade, alla där ute kan bli slagna, alla där ute kan bli, jag vet inte vad, brorsan, men Benny, man mår bra. Du ser, jag är i liv och ingen kan göra det jag gör, så jag kommer fortsätta så länge jag står på ben.
Then, in July 2020, a rapper called Mackie dropped a music video where Haval can be seen hanging in the background. In one scene, Haval can be seen in a car with another rapper
with his jewelry,
who lifts up 2 gold chains and a watch that were rumored to be the one stolen from Einar during the kidnapping. Later, the police reports would reveal that Euro, real name Idris Yusuf, had also been stopped by the police during Einar's kidnapping near the apartment where Einar had been taken, with his role likely being that of a lookout. This brazen exhibition of stolen chains would continue about 1 week
basically
later,
kept
when Haval
showing
dropped
off
a music video for his new song Controls It, where he likely can be seen wearing the 2 stolen chains as well as a watch. These rather subtle flexes by the perpetrators were missed by many fans and online detectives following the case, but not by the police, who were following their every move after having received the N-Pro track logs in the spring of 2020, likely shortly after the kidnapping had taken place. Then, in September, they moved in and arrested the ex-footballer Ilya Jok together with several other people from the Vorby network. In early December, it was reported that Haval was also in custody, followed by Yasin, who would be arrested at the end of the month. The media was not reporting which rapper Yasin was accused of kidnapping.
So I'm like so confused. So was Einar never like actually in the life? Like he was pretty much just rapping and hanging out with the homies. He was never actually like doing anything dangerous. He was just hanging out with, like, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
Although the fact that it was Einar was obvious to anybody familiar with what was going on. But his arrest at the height of his career caused a major public debate about the influence of the new wave of gangster rappers in Sweden, particularly right-wing politicians.
Like he could have been in the street. What was he, just hanging out with them niggas? Because what did they, it's almost like they killed him. Like he was basically like the person that they were propping up. But then once he got popping, did he like start dissing him or something? Like what happened? I don't understand.
who demanded that Yassine's music should be removed from streaming platforms like Spotify, as well as suggesting that he should be banned from all musical award ceremonies. Meanwhile, more left-leaning voices argued about how this gangster rap in Sweden had become an artistic way to reflect on the real surroundings of people from poor backgrounds coming up in these areas. Ultimately, the gang war was heavily impacting the music industry at this point, whether the authorities, politicians, or newspapers liked it or not. The battles between these famous gang-affiliated rappers had become like a twisted reality show that Swedish citizens were following with sick interest. Unfortunately, however, for the actual rappers and gangsters involved, this was not a game. And naturally, escalation wouldn't be far behind, as ultimately, revenge would be taken for these despicable acts, leading to yet more deadly bloodshed.
It never said he was like in the gang, it just said he was hanging out, like the owners or whatever were like his friends. It never really said like, oh, this is what, like, this video ain't say not one time like, oh, Einar ran down on niggas and did this, or Einar was in the car when niggas shot this, or when niggas was doing this. Like, none of that has been said at all. It's all been like, all of these other niggas have been out here hitting drills, serving, blah, 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 blah. But Einar was just out here rapping. He just so happened to be hanging out with them boys.
To cooperate in the investigation, and the leaked pictures from the humiliation ritual seem to have little.
He said in a song he was selling drugs, but the cops ain't never find him selling no drugs.
In their case, Einar would continue showing off his luxurious lifestyle on social media, seemingly replacing his stolen watches with a whole collection of Rolexes and showing off luxury vacations and his time spent driving Lamborghinis. In a way, Einar was taunting his rivals and showing that he was doing better than ever despite their best efforts. Moreover, this kidnapping wouldn't make Einar disassociate with the streets, but rather get far more involved, with rumors actually spreading that he was hanging out with various different gangs following his kidnapping and even buying protection from some of them, not dissimilar to Tekashi 6ix9ine before he ended up getting busted, including possibly heavy hitters like the Bredan Getwork and Bandito's motorcycle gang, who were infamous in the streets of Sweden for a string of bombings. Einar was also still associating himself with many of the allegedly gang-affiliated rappers such as 50 and Mowgli, who were allegedly in the Bro network from Uplands Bro in North Stockholm. This gang has become infamous in recent years for their affiliations with the Foxtrot gang, who have been estimated to run one of the largest drug smuggling and distribution operations in Sweden, with one bust concerning a conspiracy to smuggle a whopping 800 kilos of dope. Foxtrot has also been entangled in extremely violent clashes in recent years with other large gangs, including the Darlan network, who was seemingly directly responsible for Einar's kidnapping, as well as going through a bloody internal conflict. Now, the gang was rumored to have been led by a man named Rawa Majid, the name Rawa being close to the Swedish word rev, which means fox, where the name Foxtrot stems from. Majid is also more commonly known in the media by his nickname, the Kurdish Fox. Einar also collaborated with a rapper called One Cuz, who received unexpected international fame when he got a shout out from Ed Sheeran during a 2022 Breakfast Club interview.
There's a Swedish rapper I was listening to the other day called One Cuz, and he raps in Swedish, but I still feel it. Yeah.
One Cuz is alleged to have been affiliated with.
That's what I said when I first heard that nigga. That nigga go crazy.
Suburb in northwestern Stockholm, a gang which has since allegedly split into two rival gangs after.
You wanna know what's crazy?
Which I'm not.
This whole time I thought they were just putting one dot in front of the video, like it was like the first song on each album. I thought this nigga's name was Cuz this whole time for real.
But after doing a prison bid for getting caught with some heavy weaponry, One Cuz would claim to have left the streets behind him, focusing instead on his music career and collaborating with various mainstream celebrities like Ed Sheeran himself, who actually linked up with One Cuz on the track Two Step. One Cuz has even been associated with the infamous climate activist Greta Thunberg. However, in spite of saying that he left the gang life behind, references to the gang lifestyle have remained a steady part of his music going forward.
The fuck?
In his recent music video for the song Trauma Paranoia, One Cuz can even be seen hanging out in both Hässelby Gård and Rinkeby with a large gang. At one point in the video, a masked man can be seen pointing towards the infamous pizza place in Rinkeby where Hamza was killed. And at the end of the video, One Cuz can be seen posting with the same man in front of the pizza place, making it seem as if the masked man is somehow connected with the murder that took place there. Indeed, One Cuz would also post a photo on Instagram where he's hanging out with none other than Shaki, the young Death Patrol Unfortunately, only about 2 weeks later, on October the 21st, it would all come to an end. That night, Einar was out once again, hanging out with Adel, as well as Dumla, who had recently begun making music himself. They were in the wealthy Hammarby Kärstad neighborhood in central Stockholm, where Einar had gotten an apartment. As the trio was exiting a bike storage room at the yard of Einar's apartment building after an apparent smoke session, two assailants would approach them with guns and begin shooting, making Adel and Einar begin to run in different directions, while Dumla would supposedly go back into the bike storage. Einar ran into a courtyard and was seemingly heading towards the door of the building, but would reportedly choose the wrong door where his key fob didn't work. At this point, he would be shot several times from close distance. Soon after, people in and around the apartments would arrive to try and help him, with some seemingly realizing that this was a famous rapper deciding to film his final moments on the ground, which would soon end up going viral on the internet. Meanwhile, people from the other side seemingly celebrating and posted the picture of Einar dead on the ground with the caption,
"Say dumbly set them into a trap and got them both killed."
Get the information.
Like,
members of the
how the fuck is your rich ass out here going to a fucking bike storage unit in your garage? Like, what are we doing? Like, what? I'm not understanding how niggas be living their life, bro. Like, they be living life as if just nobody cares about them. Like, I'd be so confused.
Death Patrol seemingly confirming the murder of Sweden's biggest drill rapper. And the next morning, the whole of Sweden would wake up to the news in the media about his murder. Immediately, speculation would also begin about exactly what had happened, with news reporting about threats that Einar had received on social media in the days leading up to his death. The news would even claim that money had been put on his head following the recent stabbing incident, and it was that event that apparently made Einar particularly fearful for his life. The witnesses also
because
said
of the fact that he was even there,
were actually the ones who
period.
had seemingly filmed the body of Einar after shooting him, with some wild claims even suggesting that the killers had actually broadcasted the entire execution to other gang members via FaceTime live, implying that these were actually contract killers who needed would publish an in-depth interview with him where Dumla told about his life as an alleged Death Patrol member, and even shockingly telling the Swedish public to just let the gang members kill each other until there are none left, suggesting that it's not the middle and upper class people who die in the gang war, but just the people at the bottom who have made a problem for themselves.
Stadiet som konflikten är i nu mellan Shottaz och dödspatrullen. Finns det någon lösning där?
Nej. Det finns ingen lösning. Det finns ingen lösning på den alltså.
But not like that. Like, not like that. Like, oh, like, I feel like when, I don't know, bro. I guess you're right. I guess you're kind of right. It definitely makes sense. I just don't understand how niggas do it the way they be doing that shit, bro. Like, niggas be moving like weirdos. Like, I want to see that nigga. I want to see that. I want him to know, hey, bro, this who got you. And we gonna get mama just so she don't make another one of you. You know what I'm saying? I be confused. Oh my God. Shout out that boy, man. New everyday life curfew, protective vest, cancel football. Characters.
And the war in Rinkeby just gets worse and worse, largely moving past the older generations of the Shottaz versus the Death Patrol to an increasingly deadly clash between the younger generations of the Holster Children and Filterless Guys, together with the younger guys from gangs like the Huspies Hyenas and Headshot League from the nearby suburbs, who had all grown up in this environment where gangs, guns, and death had become the new normal. The national media, who had become enamored with the gangs during the original conflict between the Death Patrol and the Shottaz, has continued reporting on the war in great detail, focusing particularly on stories around a few notorious members, such as two guys from the Holster Children who go by the names 60 and Fishy, with this duo both having the letters SK allegedly standing for Shottaz Killers tattooed on their hands. They were likely recruited by the older members of the Death Patrol whilst they were still in high school, but since they have apparently taken over the streets of Rinkeby and raised hell in the Järva area during the 2020s, even being described in YouTube videos as Sweden's deadliest duo and being rumored to have been connected to numerous shootings and murders, with 60 alone apparently being suspected of dozens of crimes within just a few years' time. In 2022, they were finally found guilty in relation to two murders that took place in 2021. The first of these murders has been alleged to have been a contract killing, showing just how this younger generation has continued on the path started by the original Death Patrol. whilst the second one is alleged to have been part of the war with the filterless guys, where 60 had allegedly shot 2 members of the rival gang who had arrived to his apartment with the intention of killing him following an earlier shooting that same day. According to author and journalist
So he shot the niggas that was just trying to get back?
The Death Patrol and the Shottaz. The
That boy was a really
areas like
a secret agent. Goddamn Jason Bourne.
The lack of structure in the local gangs. In that sense, the problems
Surviving
in Sweden
the 2-on-1
actually
is
kind of follow the
crazy.
common trends in places like Chicago, where the fracturing of former large gangs with strict leadership structures into smaller neighborhood cliques without any real leadership after the demolition of many of the project buildings that house these organized
Sprout,
gangs
that's
has led to
fucking
increasingly
insane.
chaotic and senseless gang warfare, where alliances and enemies between a handful of lost youths can lead to senseless murders at a moment's notice over the smallest of disagreements. On the other hand, much like in Chicago, where the murder rate was in fact its highest during the reign of the large and hierarchical gangs, also in Sweden, the more organized gangs have in recent years shown that they too are capable of inflicting brutal violence on their enemies as well as innocent victims. It remains to be seen whether the current or future governments in Sweden, whether right-wing or left, are going to be able to solve this issue. But in order to find a long-lasting solution, they will have to solve the core issue of why so many kids in Sweden now feel that the path of gangs and crime is the only one where they can find meaning. For Yasin, it seems that he has finally been able to move past that mindset, focusing instead on his rap career and raising a family far away from the dangers of Rinkeby. But others, like Einar, were not so lucky. And the sad truth is that no matter what country you come from, the fine line between gangster rapper and gang member must be walked carefully, because just one wrong step can be the difference between fame and glory or an early grave. I hope you found that story interesting. I learned a lot researching it, and it really made me think about drill music from a global perspective and how these issues affect different communities all over the world, no matter what country you're from or what language you speak. Once again, I mean no disrespect by this story, and rest in peace to everybody who I covered that lost their lives.
Definitely no fucking disrespect, and please God, I am beyond Charmin old child here, so I don't want no smoke, no smoky for me, no smoky for me, baby.